She helped a homeless man. The next day, she became a millionaire. The smell of fresh coffee filled the small-town diner as Emily Carter, a 26-year-old waitress, moved swiftly between tables, balancing plates of pancakes and refilling coffee cups. The morning rush was in full swing, and like every other day, she was exhausted. But today, something caught her eye. Through the large front window, an elderly homeless man sat hunched on the sidewalk. His coat was worn and tattered, his hands trembling from the cold as he stared down at the pavement. Emily's heart clenched. She had seen him before. He had been coming around the diner for the past few weeks, never asking for anything, just watching through the glass as people ate. Her manager, Mr. Dalton, had made it clear, no handouts. "This is a business, Emily, not a soup kitchen," he had snapped last time she tried to sneak someone leftovers. But Emily couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling in her chest. She grabbed a hot plate of food, slipped the coffee into a to-go cup, and walked outside before anyone could stop her. "Sir," she said gently, kneeling beside him. The old man looked up, his eyes cloudy but sharp with awareness. Emily smiled warmly, handing him the plate. "It's cold today. Figured you could use something warm." The man hesitated, his hands hovering over the food as if afraid it wasn't real. I don't have money," he whispered. Emily shook her head. "Don't worry about it. Just eat." For a long moment, he just stared at her. Then, slowly, he took the plate, his fingers curling around the warmth of the coffee cup. His lips quivered, as if he wanted to say something, but instead, he just nodded in gratitude. Emily stood up, giving him one last smile before heading back inside. She didn't know it yet, but that would be the last time she ever saw him alive. Because the next morning, the old man was found lifeless on the same sidewalk. And Emily had no idea that this simple act of kindness had just set her entire life on a new path. The next morning, Emily arrived at the diner just as the sun was beginning to rise. The town was still waking up, the streets quiet except for the occasional car passing by. She adjusted her apron, ready for another long shift. But as she approached the entrance, something felt off. A small crowd had gathered near the sidewalk. 2 police officers stood nearby, speaking in hushed tones. A cold chill ran down Emily's spine as she realized where they were standing, right where the elderly man had been sitting the day before. Her heartbeat quickened. "No. Please, no." She rushed forward, her stomach twisting. "Excuse me," she said, pushing through the small crowd. "What happened?" One of the officers, a middle-aged man with tired eyes, glanced at her. "You work here?" Emily nodded. "Yes. I gave that man food yesterday." "Is he okay?" The officer let out a small sigh. "I'm sorry, miss. We got a call this morning. He passed away sometime last night." Emily felt her chest tighten. "Passed away?" She stared at the spot where he had sat, her last memory of him flashing in her mind, his trembling hands, the way his lips had quivered as he took the food, the silent gratitude in his eyes. Her breath hitched. He had been alone. She swallowed hard. Did he have anyone? Family? Friends? The officer shook his head. No ID, no personal belongings except for an old watch. We're still trying to figure out who he was. Emily felt a crushing weight settle on her shoulders. He had died alone, just a few feet away from where she had given him his last meal. Had she done enough? Had he known, in those final hours, that someone had cared? A lump formed in her throat, but before she could say anything else, her manager, Mr. Dalton, appeared at the door, arms crossed. You're already late, Emily, he grumbled. We've got customers waiting. Emily turned to protest, but the officer gave her a sympathetic nod. Thank you for helping him yesterday. Not many would have done that. She forced a small nod and walked inside, but her mind wasn't on work anymore. Because this wasn't over. She had no idea who that man was, but something deep inside her told her that this was just the beginning of the story. Emily tried to focus on work, but her mind kept drifting back to the old man. The way he had looked at her, as if no one had spoken to him with kindness in years. The way his hands trembled as he took the meal. And now, just one day later, he was gone. She wiped down the counter, her movements slower than usual. Had she been the last person to show him kindness? Then, the bell above the diner's door chimed. Emily looked up, expecting to see a regular customer. Instead, a man in a sharp gray suit stepped inside. He was in his mid-40s, with neatly combed hair and a leather briefcase in hand. He scanned the room, then walked straight toward her. "Are you Emily Carter?" he asked, his voice firm but polite. She blinked, taken aback. Yeah. Can I help you?" The man reached into his briefcase and pulled out a neatly folded document. "My name is Daniel Whitmore, and I'm a lawyer representing the estate of Mr. Charles Bennett." Emily frowned. "I'm sorry, who?" The lawyer's expression softened slightly. "The elderly gentleman you helped yesterday." Emily's breath hitched. "Wait, you mean the homeless man? He had a lawyer?" Daniel nodded. "Yes. And I was instructed to find you." She shook her head in disbelief. "There must be some mistake. I only gave him a meal. I didn't even know his name until now." The lawyer studied her carefully, then slid the document across the counter. "Regardless, Mr. Bennett mentioned you in his final wishes. He requested that I personally deliver this letter to you." Emily hesitated before slowly picking up the envelope. Her name was handwritten on the front. She swallowed hard. I don't understand. Why would he leave me anything?" Daniel sighed. "Because, Miss Carter, you were the only person who showed him kindness when no one else did." Emily's hands trembled as she carefully opened the envelope. She had no idea what she was about to read, but somehow, she knew, her life was about to change forever. Emily's hands trembled as she carefully unfolded the letter. The handwriting was shaky but elegant, written with care. "Dear Emily, you don't know me, and I suppose I barely know you. But in my final days, I came to realize that kindness is the rarest form of wealth. And you, young lady, are richer than most. You didn't look away when you saw me suffering. You didn't treat me like I was invisible. You gave me dignity in my last moments, something I had long forgotten. I want you to know that your kindness mattered. And because of that, I want you to have what little I have left. Charles Bennett. Emily stared at the letter, her heart pounding in her chest. I don't understand, she whispered. Daniel Whitmore, the lawyer, watched her reaction carefully before pulling out another document. This might help, he said, placing a second envelope on the counter. Emily opened it with shaky fingers. Inside was a legal deed, official and notarized. Her eyes widened. This is for a house. Daniel nodded. Not just a house. It's a fully paid-for estate just outside town. Charles Bennett's last property. He left it to you. Emily felt like the room was spinning. A house. From a man she had only met once. But why, she stammered. I only gave him a meal. That's nothing compared to this. Daniel sighed, his voice softer now. To you, it may have been nothing. But to him, it was everything. Emily wiped a tear from her cheek, overwhelmed. She had always believed in helping people, but she never expected something like this to happen. And yet, as she stood there, holding a letter from a man who had once been forgotten by the world, she realized something. This wasn't about the money. This wasn't about luck. This was a chance to do something bigger. Emily took a deep breath, her decision already forming in her heart. I don't want to waste this, she said, looking up at Daniel. I want to use it to help people. People like Charles. The lawyer smiled for the first time. Then I think Mr. Bennett would be very proud of you. And just like that, Emily's life had changed forever. But this was only the beginning. Now, she had a mission. Emily sat in the driver's seat of a car she never thought she'd own, staring up at the house she never imagined she'd live in. It was beautiful, even after years of neglect, a large, Victorian-style home with overgrown vines creeping up its sides. The paint was faded, the front steps a little worn, but it was hers. All because she had given one meal to a man the world had forgotten. But Emily hadn't forgotten him. She stepped out of the car and walked toward the front porch, holding Charles Bennett's letter in one hand and the house deed in the other. She knew exactly what she had to do. 1 year later, the house no longer stood empty. Instead, a large sign now hung by the front gate, Bennett House, a place for those who need a second chance. Emily had transformed the estate into a shelter and resource center for the homeless, using the money Charles left behind to give people what he never had, a fresh start. Inside, rooms had been renovated into warm, welcoming spaces. The kitchen provided daily meals, and the upstairs offices helped people find jobs, housing, and counseling. And at the heart of it all was Emily, the same small-town waitress, now running an organization that was changing lives. A crowd gathered in front of Bennett House for the grand opening ceremony. Business leaders, local officials, and people from the community had come to support the mission. Emily stepped up to the podium, holding the same letter Charles had left her. She took a deep breath and spoke into the microphone. Most people saw Charles Bennett as just another homeless man. But he was more than that. He was someone who had been betrayed, forgotten, and left behind by the world. And yet, in his last moments, he still believed in kindness. She looked out at the crowd, her voice steady. I was given an incredible gift. But I couldn't just keep it for myself. I wanted to make sure no one else had to feel as alone as Charles did. A wave of applause rippled through the audience. Emily smiled, looking up at the sky for a moment. She hoped Charles was watching. Because today, his last gift had created something far greater than wealth. It had created a legacy. That evening, as the first guests moved into Bennett House, Emily stood on the front steps, watching the warm lights glow from inside. She placed Charles's old watch in a glass case near the entrance, a reminder of the man who had started it all. And as she looked around at the people she was helping, she realized something. It had never been about the money. It had always been about kindness. Because sometimes, the smallest act of compassion doesn't just change one life. It changes everything.